All right, welcome to the deep dive, everybody.
Eh,
Today we're going all the way back to ancient Rome. We're talking about the Roman Empire.
the Roman Empire.
Now, when you think about it, it's kind of wild. I mean, they had this huge empire. It went across 3 continents. They gave us these incredible buildings that are still standing today, and their government. Well, it's like the blueprint for so many governments we see around the world today.
Yeah. Their influence is just massive when you really think about it. I mean, law, engineering, language, even the way we think about citizenship, it all goes back to the Romans in some way. So when we ask, like, why does the Roman Empire still matter, to us today? The answer is actually pretty simple. Their legacy is everywhere. And by understanding them, we can better understand how power works, how societies are organized, and maybe even a little bit about how humans innovate.
So it's kind of like this ancient roadmap in a
Yeah.
way. It helps us navigate the world we live in today.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're going to do in this deep dive, right? We're going to track their rise from, well, a pretty small city-state to this massive empire. And we'll meet some of the big players, the people who shaped it all. We'll dig into their military, their politics, check out their unbelievable architecture and engineering, and even get a taste of their legal system.
Sounds like a plan. It's a big topic, but I think if we focus on those key areas, we can really uncover some cool stuff.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. The Roman Empire. Well, it wasn't always an empire, was it? It started as a republic. So what was that transition like? What were some of those big turning points that kind of pushed it from a republic into this empire?
Well, that transition, it was a pretty crazy time. You had all these powerful people fighting for control. The old republic, the way it was set up, it started to really struggle with all this new land they were conquering and all the wealth that was coming in. The late republic, oh man, it was full of civil wars, and these charismatic military leaders started to pop up. They had like tons of personal loyalty from their soldiers. Think of guys like Marius and Sulla, and then of course you've got Julius Caesar.
God, Caesar. That name just screams power and ambition. And the crossing of the Rubicon, I mean, talk about a dramatic moment in history. What made that such a big deal for the Romans back then?
Okay, so the Rubicon River, it was like this legal border between Cisalpine Gaul, where Caesar was in charge of the army, and Italy itself. And as a proconsul, he wasn't actually allowed to bring his army into Italy. So when he crossed that river with his legions, he was basically saying, screw you to the Senate, and that basically kicked off a civil war. I mean, it was a point of no return. It was a huge break from the old rules of the Republic. The Romans, watching this all go down, they saw one guy, one powerful leader, challenging the entire authority of the state. It changed everything. Their whole political world was turned upside down.
A total game changer. And from all that chaos, Augustus came out on top. He's usually the one who gets the credit for founding the empire and kicking off that Pax Romana. So what exactly was the Pax Romana, and what did it mean for the everyday people living under Roman rule?
The Pax Romana, that's Roman peace if you're translating, by the way, it lasted for over 200 years. And it was a period of, well, relative peace and stability across this massive empire. Now, it wasn't like totally peaceful. There were skirmishes on the borders, and sometimes things got a little rowdy within the empire, but it was nothing like those huge destructive civil wars they had in the late Republic. And the stability, it really benefited the people living then. Trade exploded, communication across huge distances became easier, and a lot of people became pretty wealthy. With all this peace, Roman institutions could solidify, and their culture and infrastructure just flourished. It was a transformative time. And Augustus, well, he set the stage. His political savvy and the way he set up the imperial administration, it really laid the foundation for this era of peace.
So they went from fighting each other to, well, having this period of peace that really changed their lives. Let's jump ahead a few centuries to Constantine the Great. This is when he embraces Christianity, and that's another huge change that still has repercussions today. What happened when that decision went out across the empire?
Oh man, that was a seismic shift, no doubt. It changed everything. Before Constantine, Christians were often persecuted in the Roman Empire. But when Constantine converted and then issued the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, well, that made Christian worship legal. And just like that, the religious landscape of the empire was completely different. Christianity went from this like small, sometimes outlawed religion to the dominant faith of the empire. The consequences were massive. It affected their laws, their ethics, their art, their culture, everything. And it created this really strong bond between the emperor and the church, and that relationship shaped Western society for centuries to come.
So we've talked about politics, the military, religion, but the Romans were more than just conquerors and emperors, right?
Mm.
They were incredibly innovative, especially when it comes to architecture and engineering. I mean, think about the Colosseum. It's such an iconic structure. What does it tell us about Roman society and their incredible engineering skills?
The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater, as it was originally called, it's really a symbol of everything, Roman. It's grand, it's impressive, and the engineering is mind-blowing, just the size of it. I could hold tens of thousands of people. That's amazing, even by today's standards. And the way it was designed, all the tiered seating, all the entrances and exits to keep the crowds moving, and the way they could raise and lower scenery and animals for the shows, it all shows how organized the Romans were, and it shows just how much they knew about engineering, especially how they used concrete and arches. But for me, it also shows what was important to them. Entertainment, showing off their power and wealth, and, well, the sometimes brutal reality of gladiatorial combat and public executions.
Then there are the aqueducts. I mean, just imagine bringing fresh water across such huge distances. And they did it with, well, what seems like pretty simple technology. It's incredible. What's so special about these structures?
Aqueducts, they're like a monument to Roman ingenuity. They really show their commitment to public health and to making their cities work, and the ideas behind them are still being used in infrastructure planning today. These systems were gravity fed. That means no pumps or anything. They could run for miles through tunnels, over bridges, even using siphons to go over hills and valleys. They supplied Roman cities with clean, reliable water, and that meant cities could grow larger and people could live healthier lives. The precision involved in building them is amazing. They had to make sure the water flowed downhill the whole way, even over those long distances. Aqueducts really show us how much the Romans understood urban planning and infrastructure, things we still rely on today. And it's not just about function. They were also a way for the Romans to show they were in control of nature, that they cared about their citizens.
So from massive buildings to the very basics of our legal systems, their influence is hard to deny. But it wasn't just about what they built or the laws they wrote, right? Roman culture itself was like this giant melting pot.
Oh, absolutely. As the Roman Empire grew, it took in and blended all these different cultures. Greek philosophy, art, Egyptian religion, the craftsmanship of the Gauls, all of it became part of Roman society. And it wasn't like they forced people to forget their old ways. It was more like this exchange of ideas and traditions that made their society richer and more diverse. Latin, their language, it became the language of the Western world for centuries, and it's the root of many modern European languages. Roman literature, philosophy, and art, they all drew on this diverse cultural mix and contributed to it too.
Okay, we've covered a lot, but let's dive deeper into some of those things our listeners are really interested in. You mentioned earlier that the Roman military was incredibly disciplined and organized. So what exactly made their legions so unstoppable on the battlefield?
Well, it wasn't just that they had tons of soldiers or that they were brutal. Their legions, they were incredibly organized, incredibly disciplined. Their training was intense, and they could adapt their tactics on the fly. They developed really effective fighting formations, like the manipular system they used in the Republic, and later the cohort system. The manipular system, for example, was way more flexible than the old Greek phalanx. They could fight on different types of land and against different enemies more easily, and that was a huge advantage. And of course, their engineering skills played a big part in their military success. They would build roads, bridges, and fortified camps quickly and efficiently, which helped them move their armies and secure conquered territory. Plus, they were innovative with their weapons and siege equipment. They were always looking for ways to improve their tools of war. That kept them ahead of the game.
Now, going back to architecture and engineering, you talked about the importance of concrete, arches, and domes. What made those techniques so important for them to build these structures that have lasted for centuries?
Those innovations were game changers, no doubt. Roman concrete, it wasn't like anything anyone had seen before. They mixed in volcanic ash, which made it super strong and allowed them to build these massive structures without tons of support columns. It revolutionized the way buildings were made. And then you have the arch, that clever design, the way it distributes weight. It allowed them to create wider openings and build higher. The dome, well, it's basically an arch spun around 360 degrees. It let them make these huge open spaces like the Pantheon. Those techniques, they weren't just about building bigger or fancier. They changed the way people built for centuries.
Turning our attention to Roman culture and society,
Uh-huh.
you talked about social hierarchy and family structure being important. Can you expand on those? What should we know about those aspects of their society?
So Roman society was very hierarchical. Your place in society depended on things like your family, your wealth, and your social status. The patricians, the old aristocratic families, they held a lot of power in the early republic. Later, under the empire, it was the senatorial and equestrian orders who were at the top. Then you had the plebeians, the common people, and at the very bottom you had slaves. Sadly, slaves made up a big chunk of the workforce. Family structure was very patriarchal, meaning the father, the paterfamilias, had all the authority in the household. Another big thing was the patronage system, where wealthy people, the patrons, provided support and protection to less wealthy people, the clients, in exchange for loyalty and services. It was this whole network of relationships that influenced politics and society at every level. It's kind of interesting to think about how that might still exist in different forms today.
And the change in religion, from the traditional Roman gods to widespread Christianity after Constantine, how did that impact the empire and its people?
That shift to Christianity, it was a game changer, no doubt. It had a profound effect on the Roman Empire and really on all of Western civilization. Early Roman religion, it was polytheistic. They had many gods, and it was deeply tied to the state. The emperor even had religious authority. When Constantine converted to Christianity, it not only changed the spiritual landscape, it had huge political consequences. The church gained power, wealth, and legal privileges. The relationship between the emperor and the church, that became a defining feature of the later Roman Empire and the medieval period that followed.
And finally, let's talk about the fall of the Roman Empire. You said it was a combination of economic problems, military overreach, and those barbarian invasions. It sounds like a whole bunch of things went wrong all at the same time.
Yeah, it was a perfect storm. The Western Roman Empire didn't collapse overnight. It was a slow decline that lasted for centuries, and it was caused by a lot of different factors. They had economic problems, inflation was out of control, and they relied too heavily on slave labor, which actually stifled innovation. Militarily, they were overextended. Trying to defend such a huge territory drained their resources, and then you had the barbarian groups putting pressure on their borders. Eventually, those groups started launching large-scale invasions, and the empire started to lose territory. All of these factors, they were intertwined, they fed off each other, and it created this downward spiral that ultimately led to the Western Roman Empire breaking apart.
It's a good reminder that even the biggest, most powerful empires can fall. Let's switch gears and talk about some broader connections. You suggested comparing Roman governance to modern governments. What are some of the interesting things we can see there?
Well, when you look at the Roman Republic, with the Senate, the assemblies, and the elected officials, it has some interesting similarities to the democracies we have today. Ideas like the separation of powers, checks and balances, and even citizen participation, they all have roots in Roman political thought and practice. And even some of the problems they faced. Things like political polarization, powerful individuals ignoring the rules, and social unrest. Those are all issues that democracies struggle with today. It's not that these systems are exactly the same, but it shows that there are these patterns, these fundamental questions about how to govern large and complex societies that keep popping up throughout history.
And you mentioned Roman recipes, things like garum and poles. How can food help us connect with the daily lives of people who lived so long ago?
Food, it's such a basic part of every culture. When we try to recreate Roman dishes, even if we have to make some guesses based on old texts and archaeology, it helps us understand their lives in a more tangible way. Take garum, for example. It was this fermented fish sauce that was super popular in Roman cooking. It tells us about what they liked to eat, the trade routes that brought them different ingredients, and even how they preserved their food. Pulse, which was a simple grain porridge, was a staple food for many Romans. It gives us a glimpse into what everyday people ate. Exploring Roman cuisine takes us beyond the emperors and the battles and lets us see the more ordinary but still important parts of their lives. It makes history more real, more relatable.
I love that. Now, for some fun facts, did you know the Romans had a goddess specifically for their sewer system? Her name was Cloacina. That's a pretty cool detail.
Yeah, and it tells us a lot about the Romans. They were way ahead of their time when it came to sanitation and public health. The Cloaca Maxima, their main sewer, it was essential for keeping their city clean and preventing disease. The fact that they had a goddess for it shows how important they thought it was. They even revered it. It might seem like a small thing, but it shows their priorities, how they thought about city living.
And then there's this, unique practice they had of using urine to whiten their teeth. It's definitely memorable.
Yeah, that one's a bit hard to swallow today. I mean, we've got toothpaste and mouthwash and all sorts of stuff. But back then, urine was actually a common cleaning agent. It's got ammonia in it, which is a natural cleaner. Now, I'm definitely not recommending anyone try this at home, but it does show us how different their ideas about hygiene were back then.
It's those little unexpected things that really bring history to life.
Hmm.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Roman Empire, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
The Roman Empire, it's a story about ambition, about how far humans can push themselves, and about how important it is to adapt to change. They were great conquerors, but they were also masters at borrowing, adapting, and innovating. Whether it was military strategy, engineering, law, or culture, they took ideas from other places, made them their own, and pushed those ideas forward. Their influence is still everywhere, in our legal systems, in the way we build things, in the languages we speak, even in the way we think about government. Learning about the Romans, it gives us valuable insights into how power works, the challenges of running a complex society, and how cultures interact, which are things that are still relevant in today's world.
It's more than just ancient history. It's a history that continues to shape our world today. So as we finish up our deep dive into the Roman Empire, keep in mind what we've covered is just a tiny peek into this vast and fascinating world.
And as you go about your day, think about this. The challenges the Roman Empire faced, things like governing a huge and diverse territory, keeping people united despite economic inequality, and adapting to new threats. Those are challenges we still face today. Maybe by understanding how they dealt with them, we can learn something about how to tackle our own problems.
Food for thought. And that's the deep dive for today. We'll see you next time.
See you then.